You know how sometimes you're just scrolling, maybe on LinkedIn, maybe somewhere else, and something just stops you in your tracks?
Yeah, something that cuts through all the usual stuff, the updates and the articles, and makes you actually think.
Exactly that. Well, that happened for a lot of people just recently, May 21st, 2025, actually. Ashish Singhal, he's the group CEO of People Co., put up this
Ah,
post.
yes, the one about the middle class. It
Yeah,
definitely got a lot of attention.
it really did. And not because it was some big announcement, but because it touched on something, well, really fundamental, the financial reality for a huge chunk of India's population.
He basically suggested that the picture we often see, the thriving, booming middle class, even might not be the full story.
He didn't pull any punches either. He called it the biggest scam no one talks about. Which, okay, scam sounds really strong,
It's a
right?
provocative word, definitely.
Yeah.
But I think he was trying to highlight the serious disconnect.
Yeah, a disconnect between the perception of middle class life and the actual lived financial experience. We're not talking about some get rich quick scheme gone wrong. This is about the everyday squeeze.
So for this deep dive, we've really looked into that original LinkedIn post by Singhal.
And also what came after some solid reporting from places like Business Today and NDTV who picked up on the conversation.
Right, they added some more context and data to the picture.
So, our mission today, if you like, is to unpack this whole middle class hustle. Let's try and get past the buzzwords and really understand what single flagged, what the reports are saying, and what it all means for, the average person just trying to build a decent life.
Okay, let's start with the core numbers from Singhal's post. They were quite stark. He pointed out this figure, just 0.4% average annual income growth over the last 10 years.
0.4%
Yeah.
CAGR, right? Compound annual growth rate. For the middle class, which he defined as earning between, 5 lakh and 1 crore a year.
Exactly. And that number looks even smaller when you compare it to those earning under 5 lakh annually. Their income grew at 4% CAGR over the same decade.
Wow. So 10 times slower growth for the middle bracket compared to the lower income bracket. Now, 4% isn't exactly setting the world on fire either, but 0.4%, that's practically standing still.
It really is. And it gets worse when you put it next to the cost of living increases.
Right. That was the other shoe dropping in his analysis. Food prices.
He said they've shot up by nearly 80% in that same 10-year period. 80%.
So let's get this straight. Your income barely nudges up, maybe 0.4% a year on average, but the cost of your groceries, your basic food, almost doubles.
That's the reality he was painting. It completely erodes any tiny gain in income. Your purchasing power is actually shrinking.
He used that butter chicken analogy, didn't he? Or maybe it was Cole Bacher in the original script. Anyway, the point was something costing maybe 150 or 200 10 years ago.
Now costs significantly more. Maybe more than your monthly Netflix or, some other subscription you think of as a small luxury. It puts everyday costs into perspective.
It absolutely does. And it leads directly to his next point, which feels critical.
The reliance on credit.
Exactly. Credit cards, personal loans. He argued that the middle class is increasingly using debt not just for aspirations, but just to maintain their lifestyle, to fill the gap.
And it seems other sources back this up. Business Today and NDTV, they also highlighted this ongoing issue of high inflation, especially food inflation running at like 6–8% annually,
Year after year.
while salaries, for many, just haven't kept up. It's a persistent gap.
Which brings us to that phrase Singhal used. It was quite memorable.
The well-dressed decline.
Yes, that captures it so well, doesn't it? People might look successful on the surface, they have a decent phone, maybe they manage a holiday financed on an EMI.
Their loan payments are probably on time. Outwardly, everything looks fine.
But underneath, they're cutting back, maybe delaying a doctor's visit, maybe buying cheaper groceries, making those invisible sacrifices to keep the outward appearance going.
It's that constant pressure hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy. He even gave that example, didn't he? Right, Jeff?
Oh yeah, Rajesh, the 35-year-old IT guy in Bengaluru. Seems like a classic middle-class profile, right? Good job. Lives in a major city, probably has a car loan, an apartment.
Sounds familiar to many. But then you look closer at Rajesh's situation, his salary, pretty much
Mhm.
stagnant since 2015. That's nearly a decade.
But his costs certainly haven't been stagnant. Rent doubled, he said.
Doubled rent, yeah. School fees for his kid tripled. And just getting to work costs way more because of fuel prices.
So he's doing everything you're supposed to do, has the right kind of job, but he's just treading water, probably using credit cards more than he'd like.
Feeling caught, I imagine, between wanting a better life for his family and the reality of stagnant pay and rising bills. It's not poverty, but it's a constant financial tightrope walk.
And that's why Singh's post resonated so much, I think. It just put into words what so many people are quietly experiencing, that feeling of running faster just to stay in the same place.
He had that line about the facade, didn't he? The annual flights and new phones, hiding a deeper struggle.
The great Indian balancing act, he called it. Juggling everything, hoping nothing drops. It really paints a picture.
And this heavy reliance on credit seems to be a huge part of that balancing act. Loans, credit cards, those buy now, pay later things, they fuel the spending.
But it's spending based on borrowing, not earning, which feels unsustainable.
Well, the Reserve Bank of India's own data seems to point that way. Their 2024 report showed household debt is climbing, especially personal loans and credit card debt.
So it's not just anecdotal. People are borrowing more, sometimes for big things, sometimes just to keep up appearances, or maybe even cover essentials between paychecks.
Singhal used that Jenga analogy, which I thought was quite apt.
Oh, yeah. How so?
So each loan, each EMI, is like pulling another block out from the tower. It looks stable for a while.
Until it isn't. One unexpected expense, a medical bill, a job loss, and the whole thing could just collapse. It's precarious.
It really is. And yet, you see banks and lenders pushing these options constantly, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Easy EMIs, instant loans. It's almost encouraged, never mind the high interest rates that come with a lot of it. A bit ironic, really.
So why did this specific post break through? Why now? Maybe this pressure has been building quietly for years.
That's a good point. Maybe the middle class often just absorbs the shock, focus on work, pay the bills, manage the EMIs, don't really complain loudly.
Perhaps. But Singhal's post, coming from a prominent CEO, maybe gave people permission to talk about it. It sort of broke the dam.
Definitely sparked a huge debate. The comments section on his post was apparently flooded, lots of agreement, people sharing their own stories.
Though there was pushback too, right?
Yeah.
Someone questioned his own company's salary practices.
Yeah, there was some of that, which is fair. It makes the conversation more nuanced. It's rarely just one single factor or entity to blame.
True. But the fact remains, it went viral. Hashtags like hashtag middle class and hashtag salaries started trending on X. I even saw a tweet from @Bitindia linking to a Telegraph India piece about it.
So it clearly struck a nerve way beyond just Bengaluru or the tech sector. It feels like a nationwide conversation now.
Which brings us to the bigger picture, doesn't it? We hear so much about India's growth story.
Oh, yeah. GDP numbers are up, startups are booming, there's this whole vision of Viksit Bharat, a developed India.
But Singhal's post and the data around it forces you to ask, growth for whom? Is it reaching everyone?
Well, that Oxfam report from 2024 painted a pretty stark picture on wealth distribution, didn't it? The top 1% owning nearly 40% of the country's wealth.
It does create that image, like a lavish buffet where most people are just getting the garnish, maybe.
A very small garnish, perhaps. And Singhal argued this isn't just about rupees and pays, it's about dignity, isn't it?
Yes, the feeling of being valued for your work, being paid fairly, being able to save a little without constant grinding sacrifice.
He called for a more meaningful conversation, urging people to see the middle class as more than just,
A vote bank or consumer base.
Yeah.
Yeah. Treat them as actual people with real financial lives and pressures.
So who is holding the bag here? Who or what is contributing to this squeeze? It's probably complicated, right? No single villain.
Unlikely. You could look at government policies. Maybe the focus has been more on big infrastructure projects or corporate tax cuts rather than direct relief for middle-income households.
That's one angle. Then there's corporate India itself. Are companies adjusting salaries quickly enough to match inflation realities? The data suggests. I mean, not always.
And then, of course, there's consumer behavior, the pressure to consume, the ease of taking on debt.
Yeah.
But we have to be careful not to just blame the individuals caught in the system.
Right. Avoid victim blaming. It's a mix of factors. I remember the original outline had a slightly sarcastic suggestion about policymakers maybe thinking beyond just
Statues and flyovers. Yeah, perhaps focusing a bit more on the economic foundations of ordinary households. A bit pointed, maybe, but it reflects the frustration.
So, okay, the problem's on the table. What about solutions? Where do we go from here? Did Singhal or the reports offer any pathways forward?
Well, the conversation itself is the first step. But beyond that, several ideas are floating around. Obvious one. Employers need to look seriously at raising salaries to actually keep pace with the cost of living, not just token increases.
Makes sense. And from the government side, tax breaks were mentioned, maybe adjusting tax slabs so the burden isn't disproportionately falling on this group.
That's definitely on the table. Also, better financial literacy education seems crucial, helping people understand debt, Budgeting, investing, it empowers them.
Absolutely. And tackling the root cause of some of the pressure, like policies to specifically control essential costs, especially food inflation. That seems key.
And maybe a cultural shift, too, moving away from glorifying debt-fueled consumption, encouraging savings instead.
On a personal level, it's maybe just that simple reminder. Do I really need this thing right now? Can I pay for it without borrowing? Just asking that question more often.
Singal's post really does feel like a wake-up call, doesn't it? A sign that maybe the middle class can't just keep absorbing this pressure silently.
Yeah, maybe that quiet resilience is starting to shift towards something more vocal, people demanding better pay, fairer policies.
Change takes time, obviously. But these shared stories, these online conversations, they build momentum. They put pressure on employers, on policymakers. There's power in that collective voice.
So, for everyone listening who feels like they're in this boat running that great Indian balancing act, well, it seems you're definitely not alone. And the conversation is finally happening, loud and clear.
And going back to that scam idea from the start, maybe it's not a deliberate plot, but more like a systemic blind spot, a failure to see and address the growing imbalance affecting so many. Sindal's post really shone a light on it.
It really did. And it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? What are the long-term implications if this squeeze continues? What does it mean for individual aspirations, for family security, for the country's overall potential? That's something really worth thinking about long after this deep dive ends.
It is, but the fact that we are talking about it now, that these issues are out in the open, that itself offers some hope, I think. Hope for a future where the middle class doesn't just survive, but actually thrives.
Yeah.